Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. This week's video is something completely different than I have ever done. I'm covering a subject that I really think more people should know about. It's an event that occurred over 70 years ago. It's a tragedy, it's a mystery, and it's a story of people coming together in a time of need. This story has led me down a deep, deep rabbit hole. I've interviewed people, I've looked through newspaper archives, I have done a ton of research, and I'm ready to try to answer the question of how a 15-foot tall plane goes missing in 20 feet of water. This is the story of the Ghost Bomber. Now let's start with the official story, and it starts with Major William Dotson. He was commanding a flight of a TB-25. His crew consisted of 2 pilots, Captain Steve Tabak, as well as Captain John F. Jameson. Another member of the crew was Airman 2nd Class Charles Smith. Staff Sergeant Walter E. Susi was their crew chief. The plane also consisted of 2 passengers, Captain J.P. Ingram and Master Sergeant Alfred J. Allerman. Their mission was simple enough: take off from Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada and make their way cross-country to Olmsted Air Force Base in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There, they would pick up aircraft parts and drop off their 2 passengers. Afterward, they would leave and head to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., which would officially end their flight. With this being a cross-country trip, several refueling stops were made throughout the journey. The most notable of these stops is their stop at Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan. It was here that Captain Steve Tabak would exit the plane. While talking to ground crew about refueling their plane, they discovered that it would take several hours to do so. Upon hearing this, the crew decided not to refuel and to continue on with their journey. You might be wondering, why would they just trust their gauges? Why not refuel to be safe? Well, this occurred on January 31st, 1956, the end of the month. During this period of time, if pilots flew beyond a certain amount of hours every month, they would earn more money. Think of it almost as overtime. The weather at Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan was declining rapidly. Conditions were worsening by the minute. If they had waited the several hours it would have taken to refuel, they wouldn't have been able to continue flying due to the weather. And with it being January 31st, this means that their hours would have reset, meaning they're missing out on their bonus. Funny enough, you'll actually notice that around this period of time, military aircraft accidents tended to ramp up around the end of each month due to this system of pay. So with all of that in mind, the crew decided that they would trust their gauges. Around 4 p.m. on January 31st, 1956, while flying over Pennsylvania, the crew reported a rapid loss of fuel. They initially requested to land at the Greater Airport of Pittsburgh. However, Major Dotson realized they wouldn't make it, so he asked to land at the Allegheny County Airport. Unfortunately, they wouldn't make it to the airport at all. At 4:11 p.m., Dotson knew they were out of fuel, and there was no airstrip in sight. They were surrounded by mountains, steel mills, flying over the Monongahela River. Dotson in that moment knew the only way he and his men could survive is if he attempted to make a landing in the river. So imagine this. You're driving to work over the Homestead Bridge in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and as you drive, you decide to look out your window, and you see a TB-25 gliding silently over top. Well, that's what hundreds of pedestrians and workers saw that very day. The plane glided over the Homestead Bridge and made its way into the water. According to all accounts, Dotson made an expert wheels-up landing. Almost every source I found about the landing itself talk about how perfect it was, how the plane was gently put in the water. According to Herman Moden, who is a shore boss for Williams Transportation, he said to the Sun-Telegraph, "The plane was about 100 feet from the water when I saw it. The engine was going good, not sputtering. The pilot made a wonderful landing. He couldn't have done it any better." And that's the first of a couple amazing things about this story. All 6 crew members survived the initial crash. They were able to exit out of the cockpit of the plane and stand on the wing. The plane continued to float down the river as dozens of onlookers ran to the shore on both sides to watch. This is also where some early confusion begins to seep in. According to several different sources, they were either standing on the fuselage or the wing itself. For example, steelworker John Schultz claims that he saw them on what he describes as the fuselage. However, just by looking at the plane as well as talking to the people I've spoken to, it seems that the wing was far more likely, especially since it's corroborated by a lot of other people. A Baldwin police officer named Charles Kowalski told the Pittsburgh Press, "When I first saw the ship, it was still afloat, and there were 5 men hanging on the wings." That's another thing early on that shifts about this story. the number of men on the wings kind of varies. When I was reading through various papers, some people said 7, some people said 5. However, this number being a little off can kind of depend on when exactly they saw the plane. Maybe at that point when they had rushed to the river, only 5 of the crew members were on the wing. And the count of 7 could have been just confusion because, let's be honest, if you saw a giant military aircraft land in the water right in front of you, you'd be a little flustered. Now you might be thinking, okay, great, they landed in the water, what's so special about that? Where's the mystery, the tragedy that you mentioned? On that January afternoon, the air temperature was 27 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water was a freezing 34 degrees Fahrenheit. They were not out of the woods yet. This is where some of the almost inspiring stories from this event begin. Herman Moden, who worked for Williams Transportation, who I mentioned earlier, jumped into action. He immediately ran to his barge, which is where he saw John Fulcinetto. He had John phone J&L, which, for those of you who are unaware, is one of the largest steel companies within Pittsburgh. They own a lot of boats on the water, because many things are transferred along the Monongahela. In the meantime, the plane continued to float down the river, however, it wouldn't float forever. They knew that eventually it would sink, and those men would be stuck in that freezing water. John Fulcinetto would say, "I called Frank G. Kozak, dispatcher at J&L. He knows me, and he knows I'm serious." As stated, Frank worked for J&L, and as soon as he got the call that there was a crashed plane in the river, he got to work. He dispatched various boats from J&L to go rescue these men. At the same time, Regis O'Connor and Howard Wacker, who were dispatchers at the Police Communication Center, were able to dispatch several ambulances as well as patrol cars to both sides of the river to aid in this rescue. The combined effort of these men is what saved lives. Going back to J&L, the Titan had just docked and was fairly close by, so they were sent on their way. At the same time, the Zubik went on its way. There's a little confusion as to the name of that second boat, the Zubik. It seems that that company would purchase a lot of other boats and then rename them after family members. So the Charles Zubik, the Haley Zubik. So that may not have been the full, real, official name of that boat. All of these boats, these ambulances, all these things rushed as fast as they could to go save these men, as dozens of people looked on from the Homestead Bridge, from across the street. Many workers came out of their jobs to just see what was going on. At this point, the plane had completely sunk. The men were on their own, flailing in the freezing cold water. But thankfully, help arrived just in time. Major William Dotson saw a police boat but waved them off, pointing them over to Captain John F. Jameson, who was in need of much more urgent help. Thankfully, shortly after, Dotson was pulled out of the water by the Titan, and Captain John F. Jameson was picked up by that same police boat. At the same time, a truck driver by the name of Don Devine was driving by. While he didn't see the plane crash, he saw all the commotion and knew something was wrong, and something in him told him he needed to help. He immediately pulled his truck over and ran down. He would later tell the Pittsburgh Press, "When I got there, I saw 2 of them holding onto a log," this being Dotson, "and 2 more hanging onto the tail, and 1 in the middle of the river swimming to shore." Then he saw Master Sergeant Alfred J. Allerman. Don said, "I thought he was a goner. I didn't know I'd be going in after him." As if his instincts took over, his conscious brain didn't even recognize it, the next thing Don knew, he was in the water trying to save Allerman. "I didn't know I was in the water until I got in and felt the wet cold." Don was able to get out there and grab Allerman, who at this point was freezing up and couldn't swim. He pulled him about 20 feet closer to shore until he himself succumbed to the cold conditions. Thankfully, 2 patrol officers on shore were able to pull both of them out of the water. That brings me to Airman Second Class Charles Smith. It's not exactly known how he was pulled out of the water. A lot of the papers that I read didn't mention him by name and how exactly he was pulled out, but we can assume that either the Titan or the Zubik pulled him out of the water. Unfortunately, Captain Ingram as well as Staff Sergeant Walter Susi drowned in the river, and their bodies weren't recovered for several months. However, in the end, 4 out of the 6 men on board were rescued. And here's the thing. The plane floated down the river for 11 minutes before taking on water. The rescue itself only took 17 minutes all told. That's incredibly impressive, especially considering you have rival companies calling each other and working together to coordinate this, along with EMS and police. It's just something that I find absolutely incredible about this event. Now that's a great inspiring story of people coming together to save these men, and something that most people haven't heard of that's pretty fascinating. But I said at the beginning that this was a mystery, and that's true. The question is, how come the plane was never recovered? In the ensuing hours, the Coast Guard sent a ship called the Forsythia to go recover the plane. And it almost did. It snagged one of its wings. However, it lost its grip, and the plane was never seen again. In the following 2 weeks, the Coast Guard as well as the Army Engineer Corps searched for the plane and didn't find a single thing. And even to this day, the plane has never been recovered. Even with modern technology like sonar and scanning and all these things, it has never been recovered. And so that brings me to the question I asked at the very beginning. How do you lose a 15-foot tall plane in 20 feet of water? So first, let's talk about the plane itself. I mentioned that it was a TB-25. This is a training variant of the B-25 bomber. There's a couple of differences between the B-25 and the TB-25. For example, the guns have been taken out and the paint job is completely different. The B-25 Recovery Group, which is a group in Pittsburgh dedicated to researching and trying to solve the mystery of this plane, have recently put out a new render of what the plane would have looked like. And you can clearly see the lack of guns as well as the change in paint job. A little fun fact, the engines were painted black due to constant oil spills, so they figured the best way to hide it was by painting it black. Now, a typical B-25 is about 15 feet tall. However, that doesn't account for the differences between the TB-25 and the traditional B-25. Without the guns and with the wheels up, considering this was a wheels-up landing, we would shave off quite a few feet. But a couple of feet here or there doesn't really change the fact that it's only 20 feet of water. You would think they'd be able to find something in 70 years. This lack of any evidence at all of it being in the river has given the plane the name the Ghost Bomber. And so this inability to locate anything is what has led to the creation of so many theories, so many conspiracies about what truly happened. It spawned questions about what was actually on board and if the government actually removed the plane from the water in the dead of night without anyone knowing. Like Captain Carroll E. Long. Captain Long passed away in 2007. Captain Long was the skipper of the Expediter and had worked the river his entire life. And, according to his obituary, he was there on that fateful January 31st. He was on board one of the ships helping to rescue various members of the crew. While there's no record of the Expediter itself being there, it seems that Captain Long was not a captain at the time, but simply a crew member of a different ship, either the Zubik or the Titan. However, that's not the only thing that's claimed in his obituary. His daughter claims that he saw the plane get recovered from the river, and the wreckage be placed onto the back of trucks under tarps and driven away. But he wouldn't say much else beyond that. She would say, he wouldn't talk to anybody about it. He was too scared. Captain Long's daughter believes that her father was a simple man, someone who didn't want to get caught up in some kind of conflict. And so when he saw something that went against the official story and maybe even considered talking about it, he decided against it because he may have known that he was about to get himself into a very strange part of the world. And this isn't something unique to Captain Long. There have been many witnesses over the years who've claimed to have seen the plane be recovered from the water and placed on trucks and driven away into the night. Others have seen trucks driving through that area around the same time with some kind of wreckage under tarps. These people would tell others what they had saw, maybe they even tried to go to someone in the media, and then all of a sudden, they'd stop talking. They'd become tight-lipped. They didn't want to talk about it at all. Some people have claimed to have received threatening phone calls, telling them that they didn't see anything that night. Others claim that the day they saw it be taken away, members of the military came up to them and told them, "You didn't see anything. The plane's in the bottom of the river." All of these stories together, the various people claiming what they saw alongside Captain Long, makes me wonder, what reason would they have to lie? What was so sensitive on that plane? And what was so important that they had to recover the plane secretly without anyone knowing? Now, we're going to try to answer that question with a bunch of different theories. And hopefully by the end of this investigation, we'll have something resembling an answer as to what happened to this plane. We'll start off with some theories that are fairly possible, and then continue to go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. This first theory claims that the plane was carrying some sort of nuclear device. I think we often forget the kind of paranoia that people within the United States lived under during the Cold War, especially the 1950s. The Russians were making leaps and bounds in outer space. There was a red moon, as they called Sputnik, orbiting around us. The nuclear arms race was in full swing, and Korea wasn't really going that well. The last thing that the United States government needed in 1956 was a broken arrow incident in the middle of a heavily populated area. Broken arrow is a term used by the military to describe when a nuclear device is either accidentally detonated, stolen, or lost. The idea is that this TB-25 was carrying some sort of nuclear device on board, under the guise of having to pick up aircraft parts, something to sort of throw off the scent of any Soviet spies. This kind of secrecy and misdirection was not uncommon at the time. Maybe the real reason that the crew was rushing to get out of Selfridge and get to Olmsted was because they were uncomfortable carrying a nuclear device. They just wanted to get it off of their plane and done with. So when things went wrong, the Air Force swooped in, recovered their material, and covered everything up to save themselves the embarrassment, and also to not give away what was on board that plane to any Soviet spies. However, a hole in this theory would be, if you wanted to look smart and capable, wouldn't you want to publicize the fact that, hey, we found the plane, while also keeping the cover story of wanting to go get airplane parts instead of revealing what was on board? Just something to think about. This next theory is called the seventh man theory. I mentioned earlier that there was some confusion about the amount of men standing on board the wing of the plane at the time. Some said 5, and some said as many as 7. This confusion was not exclusive to how many men were simply on the wing at the time. There was a lot of confusion as to just how many guys were on board the plane at all. During the rescue operation, the confusion just ran wild. They thought there were 7. That meant they were missing another man when they had recovered the first 4. And it caused a little bit of chaos in what was otherwise a very smooth rescue operation. It seems that this confusion stems from Tabak disembarking in Michigan at Selfridge. Because if somebody got a hold of the manifest or talked to the military and said, well, how many people are on board, they may have said 7, because at one point in time there were 7 men on board. Another place where this idea of there being 7 men on board came about was because the newspapers and the news reported that 5 men were going to the hospital and that 2 had drowned. This led people to think that the 5 men going to the hospital were all men that were on board of the plane. However, Don Devine, the truck driver who I mentioned earlier, was the 5th man who was going to the hospital. As I mentioned, he put himself in severe harm's way while trying to rescue Allerman. I will say, it also didn't help that the men were going to 3 separate hospitals. So they split up these 5 men among 3 different hospitals. That definitely didn't help with the confusion. But what if the eyewitnesses were correct? What if there were actually 7 men on board that plane when it went down in the Monongahela River? One of the most popular theories is that this 7th man was a Soviet defector. In 1956, the Cold War was anything but cold, as I stated earlier with the nuclear device theory. It was not uncommon for the United States to help defectors of the Soviet Union get into the United States, especially if they had something valuable, like inside information about the Soviets. Perhaps this is why the bomber's end goal was Washington, D.C. So this defector could get off there and hand over whatever information they had to the United States government. So when the plane went down and most of the other crew members were saved by police as well as the other boats in the area, this Soviet defector was pulled from the water secretly by the government and taken away. So why recover the plane in that case? Well, maybe they had some sort of secret documents or something physical that they needed to get to DC that was so invaluable to the government that they had to recover the plane in complete secrecy. I think there's a very clear explanation for how this Soviet defector theory came about. Near this part of the Monongahela, there were a lot of steel mills and a lot of blue-collar jobs in the area. And Quite a few of these guys who worked these jobs didn't speak English very well, or even at all. These men would see everything going on and rush down by the river, maybe even getting themselves wet by trying to get in to help and then realizing how cold it was. This led to others running down, seeing what was going on, seeing a man not speaking English or speaking very broken English covered in water, and then seeing this plane down over there and these people in the water, all this chaos. You could see how someone might put together that, hey, maybe this guy was on board the plane and maybe he's a Russian because I don't know what he's saying. It's a pretty interesting explanation for the origination of this theory, and I honestly really like it. But there's other candidates for who this seventh man on board could have been, such as Howard Hughes. And the Howard Hughes theory is one that I actually don't have a lot of information on, if I'm honest. It's one that I had read in a couple of different articles about the plane. They would always say, like, maybe it was this, maybe it was that, maybe it was Howard Hughes, and then they would never touch on it again. And I feel like no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find a reason for people to think, hey, it was totally Howard Hughes on board, right, guys? Like, at least with the Soviet theory, you can understand the thought process of someone seeing all this chaos and hearing someone not speak English and them think, well, maybe it was something the Soviets did. But the Howard Hughes thing, I have no idea. But that's not the theory that myself and many others focus on. It's this next one. As with any conspiracy theory in the 1950s, aliens are always involved in some way, shape, or form. The idea of aliens being involved somehow stems from the location that this plane initially took off from, Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Nellis is not too far from Area 51, the place that many people claim is where the government is hiding all of their alien technology and all of their stolen UFOs and crashed UFOs. So, how were aliens involved in this? Perhaps instead of a nuclear device, it was some sort of UFO on board. Under the guise of picking up airplane parts, this plane was actually transferring some sort of UFO technology. Under the guise of being airplane parts. Something that was so important that it needed to be taken to Washington, D.C. Something so crazy that it needed to be recovered from the river as quick as possible and as quietly as possible. This would explain a lot of the secrecy. It would explain why people reported being told that they didn't see anything at all and being hushed by the government. However, I'm going to take it a step further. I don't think it was a piece of technology. I think that the seventh passenger was an alien. More specifically, I think the seventh passenger was an alien species known as a tall white. A tall white is a species of alien that is exactly that. Tall and very pale. They range from about 6 to 9 feet tall, have pale white skin, and blue eyes. And I didn't just pick this species of alien out of a hat. The tall whites actually have a deep connection to Nellis Air Force Base. Charles Hall is a nuclear physicist and an ex-military weather specialist. He's also an author who claims that the United States government has had contact with this species of aliens for years. Charles claims, in 1964, when I was a weather observer at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, I witnessed interactions between the military and a group of mysterious, tall, white, human-like extraterrestrials. He would continue to say that these aliens often disguised themselves as humans and would sometimes even visit Las Vegas. Seems like nobody on this planet or in the galaxy can resist trying to go see Elvis. The added element of this particular species being known to disguise itself as humans adds an extra element to it. Perhaps the crew aboard this plane didn't even know there was an alien with them. But maybe they still sensed that something was wrong. Maybe that was the true reason that they rushed their refueling at Selfridge. But, of course, that's ridiculous. Why would we put a member of an alien species that we've allegedly been in contact with for years on board of a rinky-dink training bomber? You'd think they would get the special treatment. Which brings me back to Charles and his claims. He dates his testimony to 1964, which is years after the crash occurs. It's possible that this tall white was one of the first envoys sent to Earth. Once they made themselves known, we sent them to DC to meet with our leader, under the guise of picking up airplane parts and dropping off passengers. Another possibility as to why one of the first members of this species to visit Earth and try to get in contact with us was put on this airplane could be that we didn't even know that they were on board. Perhaps their end goal, once again, was to meet our leader. They knew that this plane was headed to Washington, D.C., so they disguised themselves as a human and snuck aboard. And maybe along the way, the crew discovered the truth. Maybe they just felt something was off, but either way, that's what truly led to them having to put the plane down in the river, and to the extensive government cover-up. Either way, I think the motivation to recover the plane is quite clear. If they knew that this tall white was on board the plane, of course they would want to recover their extraterrestrial guest, as well as any personal items they may have lost on the plane. And of course, with these being alien personal items, they cannot risk any normal civilian getting access to these things. However, if the alien snuck aboard and was found out, the government has an equally urgent reason to recover this plane and study it without anyone knowing. For all they know, this alien could have been carrying some sort of disease that we have no immunity to, or maybe some kind of weapon. No matter which way you split it, this theory would perfectly explain everything. I say that obviously with a grain of, with a grain of sarcasm. But no matter if the alien was known or not, whether the crew found out or not, I think this theory gives ample reasoning as to why the government would go about covering up this incident so much. While those theories are all fun and good, let's get into some of the more plausible theories that don't really require a cover-up. Let's say for fun that the plane is actually down there and that the government didn't recover it. It's possible that we're looking in the wrong spot to begin with. According to one of my sources, the plane floated for about a mile or 11 minutes, as I stated earlier. It's possible that as it sank, it also continued to float and maybe changed position, and that's why they haven't been able to locate it. However, once it got to the bottom of the river, it doesn't seem like it would move all that much. Experts believe that the plane's propellers would have almost acted like anchors, freezing it in the mud, not allowing it to move at all. And maybe over the course of the years, as more and more boats passed overhead, up and down the river, the mud and the silt and everything just built up over top of it, burying the plane, and that's why we can't find it. But I think when I say we can't find the plane, it may give some of you the wrong idea. If we were to go down there right now, the plane wouldn't be fully intact. It actually would probably be fairly scattered. This is because over the years, the bacteria in the river would have eaten away at the hull of the plane and disintegrated it over time. Currently, if it's down there, the only things you'd be able to find are the propellers, the tires, as well as some of its fuel lines, like its self-sealing oil system. This oil system is self-sealing because it's coated with several layers of different material that are sort of rubber-like. If it's shot with a bullet, this material is able to seal itself. But that doesn't really explain how in the first 2 weeks they couldn't find the plane, as for those first 2 weeks it would have been intact. And this leads me to one of the favorite theories of a group called the B-25 Recovery Group, a local group in Pittsburgh who has dedicated so much of their time to trying to answer the question of what happened to this plane. And this theory revolves around something called the gravel pirates. You may not know what a gravel pirate is, and that's because it's something that's fairly exclusive to Pittsburgh. Gravel pirates were men who would secretly dredge the bottom of the river for gravel. Then they would sell it off locally to make some extra money. This dredging would result in these large pits within the Monongahela River. And of course, with this being secretive and somewhat illegal, there's no actual record of where exactly these pits may be. So the idea is that when the Forsythia attempted to recover the plane and it lost its grip, it sent it slipping down into one of these gravel pits, essentially hiding it from the real bottom of the river. And this seems to be the most likely, and as I stated, and it's the conclusion that the B-25 Recovery Group has come to. I mentioned some of the other attempts to find the plane, and I kind of skimmed over them for the sake of the mystery, but we'll get into them right here. The B-25 Recovery Group partnered with the Heinz History Center. They were able to map the bottom of the river using advanced sonar technology. and they believe they have found the pit where the plane is sitting currently. I was able to speak to Captain Shema of the B-25 Recovery Group. He's the operations director. According to him, based on the group's research, the B-25 is buried approximately 150 feet off the left descending bank of the Monongahela at mile point 4.9 at the place known to the rivermen as Bird's Landing. Bird's Landing was a frequent spot for these gravel pirates. Under 32 feet of water and 15 feet of silt, at the bottom of this pit most likely sits the remains of the ghost bomber. Captain Shema told me that this September, the B-25 Recovery Group will be attempting to locate the plane in this pit using an advanced metal detector. And that's very much oversimplifying it. If this metal detector is able to turn up evidence of anything related to the plane being down there, they will then plan extremely careful excavations of this pit in order to try to recover fragments of the plane. From there, they will take these samples and run them through laboratory tests in order to make sure that this is the plane that went missing those 70 years ago. So then, if this great mystery that has floated around Pittsburgh for all this time actually has a fairly reasonable explanation, why have we heard all these rumors of seeing a plane be taken away in the middle of the night, or people being told to hush or be quiet? And when I asked Captain Shema about this, he told me a story. He was once giving a talk about the plane and how they believed it was at the bottom of this pit and all of that. After the talk, a young man rushed up to him, furious, and said, "You're calling my father a liar. He saw that plane be taken away." And so I asked him, I said, "Well, do you think his father was a liar?" And he said, "No, he wasn't lying, he was just mistaken." As I stated, 1956 was a paranoid time. And it was oddly comforting to people to think that our government, our military, was strong enough and capable enough to recover an entire airplane out of a river without anyone seeing it. And the part about people not lying but just simply being mistaken? Well, because they probably did see a plane be recovered from that river, or at the very least one driven through that area on the back of a truck. 4 other planes went down in that river around the same period of time, and some of them were recovered. The interesting thing is, during that period of time, if a military aircraft was recovered within a certain amount of time, as far as I remember it is 48 hours, it could be made airworthy again. This was the case for a DC-3 that went down in the river. It was recovered, cut up, placed on the back of trucks, driven to an Air Force base, and then repaired and made airworthy again. Many people did see planes recovered from this river. I mean, think about it. If you're flying over this area and you're looking for somewhere to land, you've got a populated area on one side, mountains on the other, and then a flat river. The only place you could possibly put down that plane is in that river. So people did see planes be taken out of the river, put on the back of trucks, and driven around the area. It just wasn't the plane that they're thinking of. One more thing I want to say is, you may have noticed in this updated photograph of the plane, it has the Linda Rose on the front. Now, that wasn't the official name of the plane back then. It was actually given to the plane by Captain Shema. And the story behind it is really interesting to me. When the group would go around trying to find people to help with their research and help try to recover the plane or see what was down there, people would only recognize the plane as the ghost bomber, and this led to a negative connotation. That name is partly what led to all of these conspiracies that I just went over. And so Captain Shema decided to give it a more proper name, the Linda Rose. And with their metal detecting and their research coming up in September, I really wish the B-25 Recovery Group the best of luck. I truly hope the plane is down there. However, what if the plane isn't down there? I mean, come on, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think I'm really satisfied with, it's just buried in a pit somewhere. I think there's more research to be done. I think there's more of an investigation here that needs to be done. I got it. So, yes, I'm actually here at the Monongahela River doing my investigation. Right behind me is the bridge where the plane flew over before it landed in the water just down that way. And yeah, I came all the way out here. And as much fun as I've had with all the conspiracies and all the aliens and the Soviets and all that stuff, I think it's important to remember what this mystery, what this event is really about. It was a terrible accident where 2 men lost their lives, but it also showcased how a community can come together in a time of need. The coordination needed to rescue the men within 17 minutes is incredible. I think the fact that more people don't know about this event is really tragic. And even though I started this video thinking about the conspiracies and the crazy things, at the end of it, I just wanted to teach people about this event that deserves to be known. I think what it also shows is that no matter where in the world you are, if you look hard enough, there's always something worth learning about. There's always something strange or unanswered that you can look into, and it deserves to be found, just like this plane. So that really brings me to the end of the video. I really hope that within the next few years, the B-25 recovery group is able to find the plane, or at least something that shows it's down there. If they don't end up finding it in some gravel pit or something along those lines, maybe even just a fuel line here or there, I think we can all agree then it was the aliens. But until then, I think it's safe to say that there's a good chance that that plane is in that river right now, waiting to be found. And so that brings me to the end of this video. Thank you guys for coming on this investigation with me. I know this was very, very different than what I've ever done on this channel before. So the fact that you guys stuck around until the end really means a lot. Clearly, I took it to heart when I said I was going to put more production value into these videos. I wouldn't be out here sweating my you-know-what off if I didn't care about this channel and want to do more things like that. So yeah, thank you guys again so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a good morning or evening or, whatever. Oh my God, it's hot.